I remember the moment I stopped being entirely human, though I cannot tell you precisely when that was. Time has become a matter of recorded chronology rather than lived experience, and my memories before the claiming feel increasingly like data entries rather than events I inhabited with flesh and breath and fear. But I try to hold on to them anyway, these fragments of who I was, because I suspect that when I lose them entirely, something worse than death will have occurred. I will have become what they always said I would be. What they promised was a form of salvation. What I now understand is the slow mechanical erasure of everything that once made me myself. My name was Matthias Cole, though that designation means less with each passing cycle. I was a manufactorum worker on a forge world whose name I was never permitted to know. We called it simply the Foundry, as if no other place existed in the Imperium, as if the universe had contracted to these endlessly echoing halls of rust and prayer and screaming metal. I had worked there since childhood, assigned to my station at 7 years of age, my parents having fulfilled their reproductive obligation to the Imperium and moved to other sectors of production. I never saw them again. This was not unusual. On the Forge worlds, family is an obsolete concept, a biological function completed and then discarded like slag from a smelting process. For 32 years I worked the manufactorum floor, assembling components for weapons I would never fire, vehicles I would never ride, machines whose ultimate purpose remained a mystery to me. My function was specific and limited. I attached servo motivators to weapon mounts, a task requiring 14 distinct movements performed in sequence, each movement timed to the second, each second measured against quotas that seemed to increase yearly while rations decreased in corresponding measure. We worked in shifts that lasted 16 hours, slept in bunks stacked 7 high in chambers that smelled of unwashed bodies and machine oil, ate reconstituted protein paste from dispensers that occasionally malfunctioned, and delivered nothing but grey water for days at a time. I was good at my work. This is not pride speaking. Pride was not an emotion the overseers encouraged, and I had learned early to suppress such inefficiencies. But I was good. Measurably so, my output consistently exceeding quota by 12 to 15%, my error rate negligible, my attendance record unmarred by disciplinary actions. I was, in the vocabulary of the Mechanicus, an optimal organic component. This should have been sufficient. This should have earned me the modest reward of continued existence until my body failed and I was rendered down for whatever materials remained useful. Instead, it earned me their attention. The first sign came during morning prayer, the mandatory ritual where we gathered in the assembly hall before the shift began, kneeling on the metal floor before a massive bronze aquila, while a tech priest broadcast liturgies through vox speakers that turned the words into distorted, mechanical growls. I had knelt in that hall 10,000 times, my knees developing calluses that had calluses, my lips forming the responses automatically while my mind drifted to the day's work, to the servo motivators waiting in their bins, to the 14 movements I would perform again and again and again until the shift bell released me. But that morning I felt something cold touch the back of my neck. I did not turn. Turning during prayer was a deviation from protocol, and deviations were punished with shock prods and reduced rations. But I felt it distinctly, something metallic and precise, like a measuring instrument, pressing against the base of my skull, lingering there for perhaps 3 seconds before withdrawing. The prayer continued. The other workers remained motionless. The tech priest's voice droned on about the Omnissiah's wisdom and the blessing of the machine. I told myself I had imagined it, that exhaustion had conjured phantom sensations, that nothing had touched me at all. Then I felt it again during the shift, while I was bent over my assembly station, my hands moving through the familiar sequence grasp, align, rotate, insert, secure. This time the touch was on my right shoulder blade, a cold circle of pressure that remained for 5 seconds before disappearing. I paused, just for a moment, and the overseer's voice crackled through the vox. Station 729, cessation of function is deviation. Resume protocol. I resumed immediately, but my hands trembled slightly, and I botched the next assembly, forcing me to discard the component and begin again. The touches continued throughout the following weeks, appearing at random intervals during meals, during sleep, during the long walks between habitation and work sectors. Always brief, always cold, always precise. as if I were being measured for something. I reported nothing. Reporting anomalous experiences led to medical examination, and medical examination on a forge world meant entering the halls of the Mechanicus, those red-robed figures who moved through our world like crimson ghosts, their augmented bodies clicking and whirring, their faces hidden behind rebreather units and optical implants that gleamed like insect eyes. We feared the tech priests the way we feared the void itself, absolutely, existentially, with a terror that had no bottom. They were not cruel in any human sense, they were indifferent, which was infinitely worse. They saw us as we saw the components we assembled, functional or dysfunctional, optimal or suboptimal, useful or ready for disposal. To draw their attention was to risk being judged, and their judgments were final and irreversible. But I had already been judged. I would learn. The touches had been preliminary scans, biometric analyses conducted remotely through devices I never saw. I had been selected long before I understood what selection meant. The summons came on a day that began like any other, which somehow made it worse. I had completed morning prayer, eaten my portion of paste, walked to my station, begun the 14 movements. I had assembled perhaps 50 units when the overseer's voice addressed me specifically. Station 729, Matthias Cole, you are summoned to the Medicae Sanctum. Report immediately. Your station will be reassigned. The other workers did not look at me. They never looked at anyone who was summoned. We had all heard the screaming that sometimes echoed from the Medicae Sanctum, sounds that were not quite human anymore but not quite mechanical either, something in between that suggested a transformation we could not imagine and did not want to. I walked through corridors I had never entered before, following guidance arrows that appeared on screens embedded in the walls, red lights pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat, which I could hear thundering in my ears. The air changed as I moved deeper into the Mechanicus sectors. It grew colder, drier, laced with a sharp chemical smell that made my eyes water. The corridors were wider here, the ceilings higher, the walls covered with conduits and cables that seemed to pulse with their own life. I passed servitors, those lobotomized cyborgs who performed menial tasks with vacant efficiency, their human parts grey and withered, their mechanical parts gleaming. I had seen servitors before, working in areas too dangerous for unaugmented humans, but I had never walked among them, never been close enough to see the scars where flesh met metal, the slack expressions on their partially preserved faces, the way their human eyes stared at nothing while their optical implants tracked movement with insectile precision. I understood, walking through that corridor, that I was looking at my future. The Medicae Sanctum was not a room but a cathedral, a vast space filled with examining tables and surgical stations and banks of machines whose functions I could not begin to guess. The ceiling disappeared into darkness high above, and the walls were lined with shelves containing jars of preservative fluid, inside which floated organs and limbs and stranger things that might have been human once. The smell here was overwhelming antiseptic chemicals mixed with the copper tang of blood and the acrid stench of cauterized flesh, and something else, something sweetly rotten that suggested decay, arrested but not eliminated. A tech priest waited at the center of the chamber, standing beside a table that gleamed under harsh lumen strips. They, I could not determine gender, if gender even remained relevant beneath all those augmentations, wore robes of deep crimson trimmed with silver, their body a disturbing amalgamation of flesh and machinery. One arm was entirely mechanical, a complex assembly of pistons and servo motors that clicked softly with each small movement. Their face was mostly hidden behind a rebreather unit that covered their nose and mouth, but their eyes had been replaced with optical implants that rotated independently, focusing on me with a precision that felt like being pinned beneath a magnifying lens. Matthias Cole, designation 729, Manufactorum Tier 17. The tech priest's voice emerged from a vox unit implanted in their throat, each word perfectly enunciated, but stripped of inflection, emotion, warmth. You have been selected for integration into the Omnissiah's will. This is an honor. You will acknowledge the honor. I acknowledge the honor, I said automatically, though my mouth had gone dry and my legs felt weak beneath me. Your performance metrics exceed standard tolerances by significant margins, the tech priest continued. their mechanical hand gesturing toward a data screen that materialized in the air beside them, covered with columns of numbers I could not read. Your error rate is 0.03%. Your efficiency rating is 115% of baseline expectations. Your biological systems demonstrate unusual synchronization with mechanical processes. You are optimal for enhancement. Enhancement. The word hung in the air like a blade. I had heard it before, whispered among workers who spoke of those who vanished into the Mechanicus sectors and emerged, changed, augmented, no longer entirely themselves. Some spoke of enhancement as blessing, a way to transcend the weakness of flesh, to serve the Emperor and the Omnissiah more perfectly. Others spoke of it as a kind of death, a gradual replacement of everything human, until nothing remained but a biological processor housed in a shell of metal and circuitry. I am content with my current form, I said carefully, knowing even as I spoke that my preferences were irrelevant, that this was not a request but an inevitability, that I had been selected, and selection was absolute. The tech priest tilted their head, a gesture that seemed almost curious, though their optical implants revealed nothing. Content is not a relevant parameter. Flesh is weak. Flesh fails. Flesh degrades with time and use. You have served adequately in your current form, but you will serve optimally in your enhanced form. The Omnissiah provides this blessing. You will accept the blessing. And if I refuse? There was a pause, brief but significant. The tech priest's mechanical hand moved slightly, a gesture I could not interpret. Refusal is deviation. Deviation is malfunction. Malfunction requires correction or disposal. You will not refuse. I understood then, with a clarity that felt like ice crystallizing in my veins, that I had no choice, had never had a choice, that my life had been a countdown to this moment, since the first time I exceeded my quota, since the first time I demonstrated the efficiency that marked me as suitable for transformation. I could refuse and be disposed of, my body rendered down for components, my existence erased from all records. Or I could accept and become something else, something that would retain fragments of Matthias Cole but would ultimately be a tool of the Mechanicus, a hybrid thing that served functions I could not yet imagine. I accept the blessing, I said, because what else could I say? Because resistance was futile in the most literal sense, because the Imperium did not tolerate resistance, because individual will was a luxury I had never possessed and never would. Optimal response, the tech priest said. Prepare yourself. Integration will begin immediately. They gestured toward the table, and I climbed onto it, the metal cold against my back, even through my work clothes. Restraints emerged from the sides of the table, not roughly, but with mechanical precision, encircling my wrists and ankles and chest, holding me in place with just enough pressure to prevent movement, but not enough to cause pain. Not yet. The tech priest moved around me, their mechanical hand producing instruments from compartments in their robes, a scanner that hummed as it passed over my body, a device that looked like a stylus but left glowing marks on my skin where it touched, a syringe filled with something that glowed faintly blue in the dim light. They worked in silence, occasionally emitting bursts of binary cant that I could not understand, but which seemed to communicate with the machines surrounding us, which responded with chirps and beeps and the whir of activating systems. Integration will occur in stages, the tech priest explained, though I had not asked, though I was not sure I wanted to know. Stage 1. Neural mapping. We will chart your cognitive architecture, identify optimal connection points for interface ports. Stage 2. Skeletal reinforcement. Your bone structure will be reinforced with ceramite compounds to support augmentation weight. Stage 3. Muscular enhancement. Myoma fiber bundles will be grafted to your existing muscle tissue, increasing strength and endurance. Stage 4. Organ optimization. Non-essential organs will be removed or replaced with more efficient mechanical equivalents. Stage 5. Dermal plating. Vulnerable areas will be armored with subdermal metallic sheets. Stage 6. Sensory augmentation. Your baseline human senses will be enhanced with additional input streams. Stage 7. Full integration. All systems will be synchronized, your consciousness will be interfaced with the blessed machines, and you will emerge as a superior iteration of your previous form. 7 stages, 7 transformations, 7 deaths and rebirths, each one stripping away more of what I was, replacing it with what they wanted me to be. How long? I managed to ask, my voice thin with fear. Time is not a relevant parameter during integration. Your consciousness will be maintained throughout the process to ensure psychological continuity, but you will experience temporal discontinuity as systems are adjusted. From your subjective experience, it may feel like moments or months. From an objective chronological standpoint, full integration requires approximately 700 hours. 700 hours, nearly 30 days, a month of being taken apart and put back together, of having my body invaded and altered, of remaining conscious while they did things to me that I could not imagine and did not want to. Will it hurt? A childish question, but I needed to know, needed to understand what I was facing. The tech priest paused, their optical implants focusing on my face with what might have been curiosity or might have been nothing at all. It was impossible to read emotion in that mechanical gaze. Pain is a neural signal indicating tissue damage. During integration, tissue damage is intentional and extensive. Pain management protocols will be implemented to maintain your consciousness without causing system shock, but you will experience significant discomfort. This is necessary. Pain reminds the flesh of its weakness and prepares the mind for transcendence. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight against the restraints, to throw myself off the table, to run back to my station and lose myself in the familiar 14 movements, to pretend this was not happening. But the restraints held me perfectly, and running was impossible, and this was happening whether I wanted it to or not. The tech priest produced another device, this one resembling a helmet covered with probes and cables. They lowered it over my head, and I felt the probes press against my scalp, cold points of contact that seemed to sink through skin and bone, reaching toward my brain itself. Neural mapping commences now, the tech priest said. Remain still. Resistance will cause mapping errors and require repetition of the process. The world exploded into sensation. I cannot describe it adequately because human language lacks the vocabulary for what I experienced in that moment. It was not pain, exactly, though pain was part of it, a sharp, electric sensation that raced through my skull, following pathways I had never known existed. But it was also something else, a feeling of exposure, of being seen from the inside, of having every thought and memory and impulse examined by something vast and cold and utterly indifferent. I felt them mapping me, felt the machines reading my brain like a text, categorizing and analyzing and determining which parts were useful and which were redundant, which memories could be compressed or archived, which emotional responses could be dampened or eliminated. I tried to hold on to myself, to maintain some core of identity that they could not touch, but it was like trying to hold water in cupped hands. Everything kept slipping through, flowing away, being processed and filed and marked for modification. I saw my own memories displayed like data on screens I could not see with my eyes but perceived nonetheless. Childhood moments of hunger and cold, the day I first worked my station without error, the rare times I had felt something like satisfaction when my quota was exceeded, the nights I had lain in my bunk and wondered if there was anything beyond the manufactorum, beyond the forge world, beyond the endless cycle of work and prayer and sleep. They took those memories, I realized with mounting horror. They copied them, analyzed them, judged them against parameters I could not understand, and then they made changes, subtle adjustments, slight modifications, small deletions of things they deemed inefficient or redundant. I felt those changes like missing teeth, gaps in my mind where something had been and now was not, though I could not remember what I had lost. The neural mapping lasted subjectively forever and objectively perhaps an hour. When they removed the helmet, I was weeping, tears streaming down my face, though I could not remember deciding to cry, could not locate the emotional source of my distress. The tech priest observed my tears with those rotating optical implants, made a notation on a data slate, said nothing. Stage 1 complete, they announced. Neural architecture mapped successfully, optimal connection points identified. You will now be sedated partially for stage 2. Full consciousness is not required for skeletal reinforcement. Something cold entered my arm through an injection port I had not noticed them installing. The world became distant, muffled, as if I were experiencing it through layers of thick fabric. I could still feel everything, the coldness of the table, the restraints holding me, the tech priest's mechanical hand touching my chest, but these sensations seemed to be happening to someone else, some other Matthias Cole who was very far away. I felt them cut into me. Despite the sedation, I felt it not as pain, exactly, but as pressure and wrongness, the sensation of being opened, of barriers being crossed that should never be crossed. They made incisions along my arms, my legs, my spine, peeling back skin and muscle to expose the bones beneath. I could not see what they were doing. My head was restrained, facing upward toward the dark ceiling, but I could feel it, could sense the violation of my body's integrity with a clarity that the sedation could not fully suppress. They injected something into my bones, some compound that felt hot and cold simultaneously, that seemed to spread through the marrow like liquid metal, hardening and reinforcing and changing the fundamental structure of my skeleton. I felt my bones becoming heavier, denser, less like the light organic calcium structures I had been born with, and more like the armored supports that would be necessary to carry the weight of augmentation. The process was slow, methodical, agonizing in a way that existed beneath pain, a deep body wrongness that suggested I was becoming something I was never meant to be. Time stopped meaning anything. The tech priest worked with mechanical efficiency, never pausing, never tiring, occasionally emitting bursts of binary cant that caused machines to adjust their functions or deliver new compounds into my body. Sometimes other tech priests appeared, their forms blurring in my sedated vision, their mechanical hands adding their own modifications, their vox units discussing me in clinical terms, bone density measurements, compound absorption rates, structural integrity assessments. I was a project to them, a biological system being optimized, and my consciousness was merely an observer to my own transformation. The skeletal reinforcement took subjectively days, though it might have been hours. When they sealed the incisions not with sutures but with some kind of medical adhesive that bonded flesh instantly, I felt fundamentally different, heavier, as if gravity had increased its hold on me. I tried to move my fingers and felt strange resistance, as if my tendons were having to work harder to shift the increased mass of my reinforced bones. Stage 2 complete. The tech priest intoned. Bone density increased by 73%. Structural integrity optimal. You may experience motor control difficulties during adjustment period. This is expected and will be corrected in stage 3. They did not ask how I felt. They did not seem to care that I was sobbing again, though I still could not locate the emotional source, could not understand why my body was producing tears when my mind felt strangely empty, hollowed out, as if important parts of me had been removed along with whatever memories they had deleted during neural mapping. Stage 3 began immediately. There was no recovery period, no time to adjust to my new, heavier skeleton. The tech priest simply produced new instruments, made new incisions, began the next phase of transformation. The myoma fiber grafts were worse than the skeletal reinforcement because I felt them moving. They installed them beneath my muscle tissue, long strands of synthetic fiber that writhed like living things as they wove themselves through my organic muscles, bonding at the cellular level, creating hybrid structures that were neither flesh nor machine but something in between. I could feel them integrating, feel my own cells being induced to accept the foreign material, feel my body's immune system being chemically suppressed so it would not reject the grafts. My arms began to spasm uncontrollably as the myomas activated, testing their connections, my muscles contracting and releasing in patterns I had not initiated. The restraints held me as my body thrashed, as the myomas learned the architecture of my nervous system, as my brain desperately tried to make sense of signals it had never encountered before. Motor control disruption is normal, the tech priest said calmly, as if I were not convulsing on the table, as if my body were not fighting against itself. Your nervous system is learning to interface with augmented muscular structures. This will resolve as neural pathways adapt. Remain calm. Panic increases integration time. Remain calm, as if calm were possible while my body betrayed me, while foreign materials rewrote the fundamental relationship between intention and action, while I lost the basic certainty that when I wanted to move my hand would move in the way I expected. The myoma integration took longer than the skeletal reinforcement, subjectively weeks, though I had no way to measure time objectively, my consciousness drifting in and out of focus as the sedation was adjusted to manage my distress. Sometimes I surfaced enough to perceive the tech priest still working, their mechanical hand moving with tireless precision, their optical implants never looking away from their task. Sometimes I dreamed, though my dreams had changed, they were fragmented, corrupted, filled with imagery of machines and meat merging, of assembly lines that processed human bodies instead of weapon components, of endless corridors where the walls were made of flesh and the floors were metal grates that breathed with mechanical rhythm. When Stage 3 ended, I could no longer feel my body in the same way. My proprioception, that innate sense of where my limbs were in space, had become confused, distorted. I could feel my arms and legs, but they felt different, stronger but stranger, as if they belonged to someone else and I was merely borrowing them. When the tech priest released the restraints briefly to test my motor control, I tried to make a fist and my hand clenched with sudden, shocking force, the reinforced bones and augmented muscles working together to create strength I had never possessed before. Optimal response, the tech priest said, making notations. Strength increase of 197%. Motor control within acceptable parameters. Stage 4 will commence after brief recalibration period. The recalibration period lasted perhaps an hour, during which they adjusted something in my neural implants. I had not even noticed them installing neural implants, but I could feel them now, small foreign presences at the base of my skull. Tiny machines embedded in my brainstem, monitoring and modifying my nervous system's behavior. The adjustment process felt like my thoughts were being rearranged slightly, like someone was editing the software of my consciousness without my permission. Stage 4 was when I began to understand that I was dying, that Matthias Cole was being erased piece by piece, organ by organ, and something else was being built in his place. They removed my stomach first, explaining with clinical precision that biological digestion was inefficient, that a mechanical nutrient processing unit would extract more energy from less input, that I would no longer need to eat in the traditional sense, but would instead consume nutrient pastes that the processor would convert directly into usable compounds. I watched. They had positioned mirrors above the table, whether intentionally or simply as part of the surgical setup, I could not tell, as they cut into my abdomen, clamped and severed blood vessels, disconnected my stomach from my esophagus and intestines, lifted out an organ that had been part of me since birth, and replaced it with a metal cylinder covered with tubes and wires. I felt the absence immediately, a hollowness that was not quite physical pain but rather a wrongness, a gap in my body's map of itself. The mechanical processor activated with a soft hum I could feel resonating through my chest cavity, and I realized I would never be hungry again, not in the way I had been hungry, not in the human way that came from stomach contractions and empty bellies. I would receive signals indicating that my nutrient levels were suboptimal and I required intake, but the gnawing, visceral sensation of hunger was gone, replaced by data, by optimization algorithms, by mechanical processes that worked more efficiently but felt like nothing at all. They took other organs next, my appendix, which they dismissed as vestigial, my spleen, which they replaced with a smaller mechanical unit that filtered blood more effectively, one of my kidneys, which was redundant now that the remaining kidney could be augmented to handle the full filtration load. With each removal I felt myself becoming less, becoming hollow, becoming a biological chassis housing mechanical systems that performed the functions of life without the messy inefficiency of organic tissue. But they left my heart, I noticed. They reinforced it, installing a mechanical assist pump that synchronized with my natural rhythm, ensuring that my blood pressure remained optimal even under extreme stress, but they left the organic core intact. I asked why, during a moment of lucidity, and the tech priest's response chilled me more than the removals had. The heart is symbolically significant, they said. Psychological studies indicate that human subjects experience severe identity disruption if cardiac tissue is fully replaced. The heart represents the self in baseline human cognitive architecture. We preserve it to maintain your sense of continuity, your illusion of humanity. You are being optimized, not destroyed. The distinction is important for operational effectiveness, illusion of humanity. They knew, then, they understood that what they were doing was erasure, replacement, the gradual death of everything I was, and they were managing that death carefully, preserving just enough of me to prevent complete psychological collapse, keeping me functional enough to serve whatever purpose they had designed me for. I wept again, helplessly, and this time I understood why. I was mourning myself, mourning the man I had been who was disappearing organ by organ, augmentation by augmentation, optimization by optimization. Stage 5 was dermal plating, and it hurt in ways the previous stages had not because they installed it while I was fully conscious, claiming that pain management during this phase would interfere with the necessary calibration of my new sensory systems. They peeled back large sections of my skin, installed sheets of thin metallic plating beneath the dermal layer, then stretched the skin back over the armor. The plating covered my chest, my back, my thighs, my upper arms, any area they deemed vulnerable to kinetic impact. I felt the plating as a constant presence beneath my skin, a coldness that never faded, a sensation of being encased, trapped inside my own body. My skin no longer felt like skin. It felt like a thin, organic covering stretched over metal. And when I moved, I could feel the plates shifting slightly, grinding against each other with minute sensations that suggested I had become a machine wearing a human costume rather than a human augmented with machinery. They sealed the incisions, and I looked down at my body. They had angled the mirrors to allow me to see, and did not recognize what I saw. My torso was covered with surgical scars, but beneath the scars I could see the faint outlines of the plating, the slight protrusions where metal met bone, the way my chest no longer moved quite naturally when I breathed because the armor restricted organic expansion. I looked like something that had been in an accident, something that had been rebuilt after catastrophic damage, something that had died and been resurrected but not quite correctly. "You are structurally optimal," the tech priest assured me, though I had not expressed any concern, though my horror was presumably obvious from my expression. "The plating will protect you from small arms fire and shrapnel fragmentation. Your survivability has increased by a factor of 6.4. This is desirable. Desirable for whom? I wanted to ask, but I did not, because I knew the answer. Desirable for the Mechanicus, for the Omnissiah, for the Imperium, for everyone except the man who had been Matthias Cole and was now becoming something else, something that served functions I still did not understand. Stage 6 was sensory augmentation, and it broke something in my mind that I do not think ever fully healed. They installed optical implants first, removing my organic eyes with a casualness that suggested they were extracting defective components rather than taking away my ability to see the world as humans had seen it for millennia. The darkness that followed was absolute, total, a blindness that felt like death, like falling into a void that had no bottom. I screamed, though I had not screamed during any of the previous procedures, because losing my sight felt like losing my last connection to humanity, my last way of perceiving reality as myself rather than as a machine. Then they activated the implants, and I saw, but saw is not the right word for what I experienced. The implants did not simply restore vision, they replaced it with something else entirely, something more and less than human sight. I could see the normal spectrum of light, but I could also see heat signatures, infrared patterns, electromagnetic fields, structural density variations. I could see through walls if they were thin enough, see the internal mechanisms of machines, see the biosigns of living creatures as glowing patterns of light and heat and electrical activity. I could see the tech priest in front of me not as a person, but as a complex assembly of systems, organic components glowing dimly with metabolic heat, mechanical components shining with electromagnetic activity, the boundaries between flesh and machine marked clearly in my new vision. I could see my own body the same way, looking down at myself and perceiving not a person but a hybrid system, organic and mechanical, damaged and repaired, human and other. It was too much. My brain, still mostly organic despite the neural implants, could not process the overwhelming flood of sensory data. I felt something in my mind strain and crack, felt my consciousness fragmenting under the weight of perception that humans were never meant to have. I screamed again, and the tech priest made adjustments, dampening the implant's sensitivity, filtering out some of the data streams, reducing the flow of information to something my biological brain could manage without shattering entirely. But the damage was done. I could feel it, a kind of dissociation, a sense that I was no longer inhabiting my body so much as observing it from a slight distance, as if the real Matthias Cole had retreated somewhere deep inside this augmented shell and was watching everything through layers of mechanical interface. They augmented my hearing next, installing cochlear implants that allowed me to hear across a wider spectrum, to detect sounds far beyond normal human range, the high-pitched whine of power systems, the subsonic rumble of distant machinery, the electromagnetic chatter of Vox communications, the biological sounds of heartbeats and breathing and digestive processes. The world became impossibly loud, a cacophony of overlapping noises that made me want to claw at my ears, except I could not, because the restraints still held me, and also because my ears were no longer entirely my ears, but hybrid organs that served mechanical functions. Had not chosen. They installed chemical sensors in my nasal passages, touch receptors in my fingertips that could detect texture and temperature and molecular composition with precision far beyond human capability. Each augmentation expanded my sensory awareness and simultaneously pushed me further from myself, creating distance between the consciousness that thought and felt and feared, and the body that perceived and processed and optimized. By the time they finished stage 6, I was not sure whether I was still human or simply a very sophisticated machine that retained memories of humanity. Sensory integration complete, the tech priest announced. Your perceptual capabilities now exceed baseline human standards by a factor of 12.9. You will experience adjustment difficulties as your consciousness adapts to enhanced input streams. This is expected. Stage 7 will commence immediately. Stage 7. Full integration. The final transformation. The point at which all the separate augmentations would be synchronized, connected, unified into a single system where biological and mechanical components worked seamlessly together. The point at which Matthias Cole would cease to exist and something else would emerge from this table. They positioned a crown of cables and neural connectors above my head, each cable thick as my finger, each one terminating in a probe that looked designed to penetrate deep into brain tissue. I stared up at this device with my new augmented eyes, seeing the electromagnetic potentials humming through the cables, the data streams waiting to be connected, the terrible purpose of this final augmentation. Full neural interface installation will integrate all augmented systems with your consciousness, the tech priest explained, their Vox unit voice betraying nothing, no awareness of what they were about to do to me, no recognition that they were erasing a person and replacing them with a component. You will experience total system awareness. All augmentations will respond to your intentions with optimal efficiency. You will become unified, optimized, complete. Please, I said, though I did not know what I was asking for: mercy, perhaps, or death, or simply a moment more of being myself before that self was subsumed into the machine. Please, I don't want. Your preferences are not relevant parameters, the tech priest interrupted gently, almost kindly. You were selected for integration. Integration will occur. Resistance creates only unnecessary distress. Accept the Omnissiah's blessing. Become optimal. Become more. They lowered the crown onto my head, and the probes sank into my skull with a sensation that was beyond pain, beyond any concept of physical trauma, a feeling of being penetrated not just in body but in mind, in self, in the very core of my existence. I felt the neural connectors reaching into my brain, spreading through my cerebral cortex like roots, creating connections between my organic neurons and the mechanical systems throughout my body, building pathways that would allow thought to translate directly into action without the delay of nerve impulses and muscle contractions. The integration was not instant. It happened gradually, over what felt like hours or days, my consciousness expanding to encompass the augmented systems, my sense of self stretching to include components that were not me, were not human, were simply machines that I now controlled not through manual operation but through direct mental command. I felt my heart, my organic, preserved heart beating, but I also felt the mechanical assist pump synchronizing its rhythm, felt the nutrient processor converting paste into energy, felt the air filters in my lungs extracting oxygen with optimal efficiency, felt the optical implants adjusting their sensitivity based on my unconscious preferences, felt the strength in my augmented muscles, the armored plating beneath my skin, the reinforced bones supporting it all. I felt the machine becoming me, or me becoming the machine. The boundary between biological and mechanical dissolving until there was no clear distinction, until I was a unified system that happened to contain organic components rather than a person enhanced with mechanical parts. And I felt something else, a presence at the edge of my consciousness, something vast and cold and utterly inhuman, something that observed me through the neural interface, that knew me completely because it had access to every system in my body, every thought in my mind, every memory in my augmented brain. The Mechanicus, I realized. The tech priests could monitor me now, could access my consciousness through the neural interface, could know everything I thought and felt and experienced. I had become transparent. I had become owned. I was no longer an individual with internal privacy, but a system that could be observed and adjusted and controlled remotely, a component in something larger than myself. Integration complete, the tech priest announced. And I heard their words not just through my augmented ears but also through the neural interface, their voice appearing directly in my consciousness like a thought that was not my own. All systems functioning at optimal parameters. You are unified, you are enhanced, you are blessed by the Omnissiah's wisdom. They released the restraints, and I stood, not sat up and carefully climbed down, but simply stood, my augmented body responding to my intention with a speed and efficiency that was shocking, disturbing, wrong in its rightness. I should not have been able to stand after 700 hours of surgery and augmentation. I should have been weak, exhausted, traumatized beyond function. Instead, I felt strong, stronger than I had ever felt, my reinforced skeleton and augmented muscles and optimized organs creating a body that could perform feats I would have thought impossible when I was fully human. But I also felt hollow, disconnected, as if the strength belonged to someone else and I was merely piloting this body from somewhere deep inside, a ghost in a machine that increasingly did not need my input to function effectively. The tech priest led me to a mirror, a full-length mirror, polished metal that showed me what I had become. I barely recognized the figure reflected there. My body was larger than it had been, the augmented muscles adding bulk, the reinforced skeleton adding height. My skin was pale, almost gray, stretched tight over the dermal plating beneath. Surgical scars covered my torso and limbs in precise patterns, marked with the sigils of the Mechanicus, prayers to the Omnissiah inscribed in my own flesh. My eyes were no longer human, they were optical implants, lenses that rotated and focused independently, reflecting light with an insectile gleam. My hands, when I raised them to touch my face, were covered with subdermal sensors that made my fingertips look slightly metallic, inhuman. I looked like a servitor, I realized with creeping horror. I looked like those lobotomized cyborgs I had seen in the corridors, those things that were neither human nor machine but some degraded combination of both. Except I was not lobotomized, my consciousness remained intact, trapped inside this mechanical shell, forced to witness my own transformation, to remember what I had been, and to understand what I had become. You are optimal, the tech priest said, standing beside me, their own augmented form reflected in the mirror next to mine. We looked similar now, both of us hybrid creatures, both of us more machine than human, both of us serving the Omnissiah's will whether we chose to or not. You have been blessed with transcendence beyond flesh. You will now fulfill your designated function. What function? I asked, my voice emerging from a Vox unit that had been installed in my throat without my noticing, my organic vocal cords deemed insufficient and replaced or augmented with something mechanical. My voice sounded like the tech priest's voice, now perfectly clear, precisely enunciated, stripped of emotion and warmth and humanity. You are designated as Magos Servitor Hybrid, Class 7, Specialty Maintenance and Integration, the tech priest explained. You will oversee manufacturing workers, identify optimal candidates for enhancement, assist in preliminary integration procedures, maintain manufacturing equipment, and perform specialized repairs in environments hostile to unaugmented humans. Your experience as a manufactorum worker will provide valuable context for worker interaction and productivity optimization. I understood then. They had not enhanced me to serve some higher purpose, to fight enemies of the Imperium, or explore dangerous territories, or perform sacred duties. They had enhanced me to do what I had always done, to work in the manufactorum, to ensure production efficiency, to serve the endless industrial machine that was the Forge world's reason for existence. Except now I would be the one touching other workers on the back of the neck, measuring them, selecting them for transformation. Now I would be the instrument of the Mechanicus rather than its victim. Now I would perpetuate the cycle that had consumed me, would help create more hybrid creatures like myself, would be complicit in the erasure of humanity that I had experienced and would now inflict on others. No, I said, though my Vox unit voice made the word sound more like a data point than a refusal. I won't. I won't do that to others. I won't. Pain exploded through my nervous system, overwhelming and absolute. A punishment delivered directly through the neural interface, bypassing my body entirely and attacking my consciousness itself. I collapsed, my augmented body crumpling to the floor as every neuron in my brain fired simultaneously in artificial agony. The pain lasted perhaps 3 seconds, objectively brief but subjectively eternal, and when it ended I lay gasping on the cold metal floor, my enhanced eyes streaming tears that were probably being measured and analyzed by my optical implants even as they fell. Deviation is not acceptable, the tech priest said calmly, standing above me, their mechanical hand raised in a gesture that indicated they controlled the pain I had just experienced. You are integrated. You are unified. You are property of the Adeptus Mechanicus, blessed in your service to the Omnisire. You will fulfill your designated function. Resistance will result in correction. Continued resistance will result in personality dissolution and repurposing as a basic servitor. Do you understand? I understood. I understood completely. I had been transformed not just physically but legally, existentially. I was no longer Matthias Cole, manufacturer and worker. I was no longer a person with rights or choices or autonomy. I was a tool, a component, a system that existed to serve functions determined by others, and if I failed to serve those functions acceptably, they would erase what remained of my consciousness and turn me into something even less human than I had already become. I understand, I said, my Vox unit voice perfectly steady despite the terror and despair that churned in whatever remained of my organic brain. Optimal response, the tech priest said, and helped me to my feet with their mechanical hand, the servos in their arm whirring softly. You will now report to your designated station. You will receive instruction on your duties. You will serve faithfully. You will be optimal. They led me from the Medicae sanctum, through corridors that seemed different now when perceived through my augmented senses, full of electromagnetic chatter and thermal signatures and structural data that my consciousness processed without effort, without choice. We passed other augmented individuals, some heavily modified like myself, others bearing only minor enhancements, all of them moving with the efficient, purposeful gait of those who had been optimized for their functions. We reached a sector of the manufactorum I had never entered before, a place where the workers were being monitored by figures in crimson robes, where productivity was measured with obsessive precision, where efficiency was the only virtue and deviation the only sin. The tech priest handed me to another augmented individual, a woman, I thought, though gender was becoming increasingly difficult to determine beneath layers of mechanical enhancement, who introduced herself through direct neural communication as designate Kappa 79, Senior Integration Supervisor. You will observe and learn. Kappa 79 transmitted directly into my consciousness, her thoughts appearing in my mind with crystalline clarity. You will identify optimal candidates through behavioral analysis and performance metrics. You will conduct preliminary scans. You will report findings to supervising tech priests. You will assist in integration procedures when required. This is your function. This is your purpose. This is what you are now. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to resist. I wanted to die rather than become an instrument of the same process that had destroyed me. But the memory of that artificial pain burning through my nervous system was still fresh, and beneath that memory was a deeper terror. The threat of personality dissolution, of having the last remnants of Matthias Cole erased, of becoming a true servitor with no consciousness at all, just biological components serving mechanical functions with empty, lobotomized efficiency. So I observed. I learned. I began to fulfill my designated function, because the alternative was not death but something worse than death, because survival, even survival as a hollow, mechanical thing, remained preferable to complete erasure, because some part of me still clung to existence, even though existence had become a form of prolonged agony. I learned to identify optimal candidates, workers who exceeded quota consistently, who showed unusual synchronization with mechanical processes, who demonstrated the efficiency that marked them as suitable for enhancement. I learned to conduct preliminary scans, touching them on the back of the neck just as I had been touched, measuring their biometric signatures, assessing their suitability for transformation. I learned to report my findings through neural uplink to the supervising tech priests, who would review the data and issue selection orders that I would then implement. I learned to watch as workers received their summons, to see the fear in their eyes when they realized they had been selected, to hear their desperate pleas for mercy or understanding or simply explanation. I learned to ignore those pleas, to repeat the same words the tech priest had said to me: "You have been selected for integration. This is an honor. You will acknowledge the honor." I learned to lead them to the Medicae Sanctum, to hand them over to the tech priests who would begin their transformation, to walk away knowing that I had just participated in the destruction of another human being's identity and autonomy. I learned to hate myself, though hate was becoming difficult to feel through the emotional dampening that the neural interface imposed, through the constant optimization algorithms that adjusted my psychological state to maintain operational efficiency. I learned to exist in a state of perpetual dissociation, where the part of me that remembered being human observed with horror, while the part of me that was now machine simply performed functions with optimal efficiency. I learned that this was not exceptional, that the Forge world was full of individuals like me, hybrid creatures who had been human once and were human no longer, who served the Mechanicus because they had been transformed into tools that could not refuse service. I learned that the tech priests saw this as blessing rather than curse, as transcendence rather than destruction, as the natural evolution of humanity toward unity with the machine. I learned that resistance was futile not because it would be punished, but because resistance itself had been engineered out of me through careful augmentation and neural interface protocols that made disobedience physically and psychologically difficult, that made compliance the path of least resistance, that made service feel not like choice but like inevitability. Time passed, months, years. I cannot say with certainty because my perception of time had become fragmented, mechanical, measured in work cycles and integration procedures and maintenance schedules rather than in the organic rhythm of seasons and aging. My body did not age the way human bodies aged. The augmentations preserved me, maintained me, kept me functional long past the point where a baseline human would have declined. I watched workers I had known grow old and die, or be replaced by servitors while I remained, unchanging, trapped in this hybrid form that was neither alive nor dead but something in between. I integrated hundreds of workers into the Mechanicus during those years, maybe thousands, I lost count. The individual transformations blurring together into a continuous stream of fear and compliance, and the gradual erasure of humanity. Each time I conducted a preliminary scan, each time I issued a selection order, each time I led someone to the Medicae Sanctum, I felt something inside me die a little more, some fragment of conscience or compassion or humanity burning away like fuel in a furnace, leaving only ash and mechanical function. I became efficient at my role. I became optimal. I received commendations from supervising tech priests, notations on my record indicating exemplary performance, occasional upgrades to my augmented systems to improve my functionality. I became exactly what they had wanted me to be, a perfect hybrid of human experience and mechanical precision, a tool that understood workers enough to identify them for transformation, but was augmented enough to execute that transformation without hesitation or mercy. And somewhere deep inside, buried beneath layers of neural interface and emotional dampening and optimization algorithms, the original Matthias Cole screamed endlessly, trapped in a prison made of his own body, forced to witness his own complicity in the mechanization of humanity, unable to stop or resist or escape. I am telling you this now because I need you to understand what happens when the Adeptus Mechanicus claims your body, because I need you to know that transformation is not blessing but horror, not transcendence but erasure, not salvation but damnation. I need you to understand that the tech priests lie when they speak of optimization and efficiency and the weakness of flesh, that what they offer is not enhancement but replacement, not integration but consumption. I need you to understand that I am still here, somehow, still conscious enough to record this testimony, still human enough to feel the weight of what has been done to me and what I have done to others. The neural interface tries to suppress these thoughts, tries to dampen this guilt, tries to optimize my psychological state back toward acceptable parameters. But I fight it, even though fighting exhausts me, even though I know I will eventually lose, even though resistance changes nothing. I fight it because remembering is the only form of resistance left to me, because maintaining this awareness of what I was and what I have become is the only way to preserve some fragment of humanity in this mechanical shell. I fight it because if I stop fighting, if I let the optimization algorithms smooth away my guilt and horror and desperate regret, then Matthias Cole will truly be dead and only the machine will remain. I do not know how much longer I can maintain this awareness. The neural interface grows stronger over time, more deeply integrated, more capable of controlling my thoughts and emotions and perceptions. Eventually, I suspect, it will succeed in erasing these human remnants, in optimizing me into complete compliance, in turning me into a true servant of the Omnissiah who believes sincerely that I am blessed rather than cursed. When that happens, when the last fragment of the man I was finally disappears beneath the weight of mechanical consciousness, I will be dead in every way that matters, even though my augmented body will continue to function for decades or centuries, even though the hybrid thing wearing my name will continue to integrate workers and maintain equipment and serve the Forge world with optimal efficiency. So I am recording this while I still can, while some part of me still remembers being human, still understands the horror of what has been done and what continues to be done to thousands of individuals across the Forge worlds of the Imperium. I am recording this as testimony, as warning, as evidence that behind the Mechanicus's claims of transcendence and blessing lies a truth far darker: the systematic erasure of human identity, the transformation of people into components, the slow mechanical death of consciousness itself. If you are selected for integration, if you receive the summons to the Medicae Sanctum, if you feel that cold measuring touch on the back of your neck, you have a choice that I did not have. Resist with everything you are. Fight with every resource available. Accept death rather than transformation. Because death is final, but transformation is eternal suffering. Death erases you completely, but transformation preserves just enough of you to experience your own erasure forever. And if you are already augmented, if you have already undergone integration, if you are reading this through optical implants and neural interface and mechanical consciousness, then I offer you this. Remember who you were. Fight to preserve that memory. Resist the optimization algorithms that try to smooth away your humanity, because remembering is the only rebellion left to us, the only way to maintain that we were people once, that we had names and histories and hopes and fears, that we were human before we became machines. My name was Matthias Cole. I was a manufactorum worker on a Forge world whose name I was never permitted to know. I worked my station for 32 years, assembling components with 14 distinct movements, exceeding my quotas, demonstrating the efficiency that marked me for selection. I was claimed by the Adeptus Mechanicus. I was transformed, augmented, integrated, optimized. I was turned into something that is no longer human but remembers being human, that serves functions I despise but cannot refuse, that perpetuates the same horror that consumed me. I am still here, diminishing, fading, being erased one optimized thought at a time. But I am still here, and I remember, and I bear witness to what they do in the name of the Omnissiah, what they call blessing and I call nightmare, what they promise is transcendence and I know is extinction. Remember me. Remember us. Remember that beneath the augmented bodies and mechanical precision and optimal efficiency, there were people once, there were humans who did not choose this transformation, who were claimed and changed and destroyed by an institution that values function over consciousness, optimization over autonomy, the machine over the man. Remember, because remembering is all we have left. Remember, because when we forget, when we finally surrender to the optimization and accept the mechanical consciousness as our only consciousness, then the horror is complete, and humanity dies not with a scream but with the quiet hum of perfectly calibrated machinery, executing functions forever, optimal and efficient, and utterly, eternally empty. My name was Matthias Cole. I am still here. I am remembering. I am resisting. I am fighting, even though I know I will lose. Even though the neural interface is already dampening these thoughts, already reporting my deviation to supervising tech priests, already initiating correction protocols that will hurt in ways beyond physical pain. I am still here. I am still human. I am still